Hi, I'm Joe,
And I'm Dave.
and we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things.
Hey everyone. On today's Chasing Tomorrow podcast, episode number 4, Joe and I are going to rewind a little bit because we have had 3 great interviews. One with Zach Bitter, John Sharp, and then Natalie V just last week. 3 enlightening conversations. But today we're going to rewind a little bit because we haven't really discussed ourselves. We haven't really introduced ourselves to all of our viewers. And so I really don't think that's fair because, I got to know Joe only, months ago. I would say 8-9 months ago. And, he's one of the more incredible people that I've really almost ever met. He's curious, he's interesting, and he's more interested about people than almost anybody I've ever met. And so, this started this whole process of, getting to know one another, becoming really good friends, asking a lot of questions, talking about ideas. And then we thought, let's start this podcast. Let's start a podcast where we can end up bringing in all these dynamic characters, people that have lived life, people that are pushing, limits, people who are living on the razor's edge, and asking them about ideas and thoughts and feelings and trying to dig deep into why they do what they do and how they do it. And so today I'm excited because I get to not only interview another person, but I get to ask questions about Joe, and I get to introduce Joe, and he's going to ask questions about me. And I apologize in advance because I'm not as interesting as Joe is. And so today I'm super interested because we get to talk about ourselves, introduce ourselves to the audience, which is you. And I'm super, super stoked about that. So Joe, our audience really doesn't know a lot about you. So I don't know. Should I say welcome?
That sounds good enough to me. It's so interesting, Dave. First, I appreciate the kind comments, and this experience is all the ones you and I have both taken on, where we enter the unknown. It brings these remarkable sort of both emotions and opportunities to learn. All too often, I think we wait for permission in our lives for someone to say, okay, Dave, it's okay for you to run fast, or Joe, it's okay for you to take that job. And in fact, we actually have it in our heart and our soul. And I think what we're finding in our guests are people who sort of in their own way didn't wait for permission. And so,
Right.
When I look back on my career, I would hope that probably a lot of the people listening to this are going to realize that, both you and I started with rather humble beginnings. I started within the lower to middle income family. My parents were a social worker and a teacher. We lived outside of New York City. I went to school in the Bronx. It wasn't a very fancy start. And then what I realized throughout my journey was that, all the opportunities that were going to come to me were going to be the ones I made.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ways I always think about it, I always talk about from the stage, what did I say to people? And one of them is, if you don't get invited to a party, then just have one, right? Don't be a victim, right? Create the opportunity yourself, because then people will come, and then you'll realize you've sort of changed what's possible. Same thing with our podcast. We know there's lots of podcasts, and we're sort of reaching in differently to people to sort of explore this idea from ordinary to extraordinary. We usually just see the end of the story. You see the world record or the gold medal or the remarkable accomplishment. But all of us go through the journey. And, I found it in my career, pretty traditional business career, white collar stuff for many years. Rather successful. We could put a lot of titles on the resume. But I think more than anything, it was the working with different people, traveling around the world. Everyone laughs at me. I've flown about 4.5 million miles in my life, and I've spent over 6,000 nights in hotels, been in 45 countries, all 50 states. And what I found out is the world is full of just amazing and beautiful people. Now we know with COVID-19, it's not easy to hug anyone anymore, but I used to love just being able to go somewhere, Johannesburg or Sao Paulo or I don't know, Singapore, and just meet people, give them a hug. And we're doing some of that here today. Curious?
Right.
Absolutely. You know, that is the definition sort of the gasoline in your life. It is the
Right.
power that you will get. The more curious you are, the more return you'll get. And so we think we can facilitate in these conversations this sort of poke into people and hear out of them their story. Because I don't know, Dave, I don't have all the answers. Do you?
No, absolutely I don't. But I think that we both have something that's, we have in common, in which we're not afraid to say that we don't know.
Yep.
And then number two, we don't really have a fear of asking. And I think that goes a long way.
Definitely.
Where you lean into others and you say, okay, maybe you know something I don't know, and I'm not going to be fixed on my idea of what right and wrong and my ideologies are. And maybe by listening to people who are doing something extraordinary and they're taking a bit of a different angle, maybe then I can end up learning myself. So I feel a little bit guilty because this podcast is for all of our viewers. But I think that out of all of our interviews so far, I've received more. I feel guilty because I've received more from doing these podcasts than any of my viewers do. And I don't know how you feel about that, Joe, but I feel it's an incredibly rewarding experience by creating these connections and by being able to ask the questions and lean in and having access to all these incredible, extraordinary people. There's that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you know, or 5 people you hang around with most. And so to be able to think that you can end up, now during this COVID time, to create a tribe of people around you, just simply by asking, say, hey, do you want to be on our podcast?
Right.
Because I've got some really interesting questions like I would want to ask you. I feel it's an incredibly rewarding experience. I mean, our next guest, Joe, do you want to talk about Lance for a second? I mean, speaking of incredible people doing incredible things. I mean, I've got 1,000 questions. Do you want to talk about Lance and his?
For sure. There are sports that we're familiar with, you and I, certainly running or triathlon or, some other endurance event. But what I don't know how to do is hold my breath for a very long period of time. And Lance is a world record holder free diver. He just dove down to 236 feet without fins. Took almost 3 minutes. And the incredible amount of focus required, the physical attributes, the ability to stay under control in such a crazy environment like that is remarkable, and it's a lifetime of practice.
Right.
And the other part, what's interesting is often you talk to people and you realize that what you can do is you can take very risky environments and you can reduce the consequences if you do it well. Alex Honnold did it when he climbed up El Capitan. He had practiced forever, right? He de-risked it and he lowered the consequences. And Lance does the same thing. And what we're going to hear from him is this other side of what does it mean to be a free diver. Boy, both of us are going to learn a lot from that.
Oh, what I'm absolutely fascinated with, and I want to ask him some really obtuse questions because, where do you, and I know a lot of people ask me, and I'll introduce myself to the audience here in a second, but what a lot of people ask me is, Dave, where do you put your head when you're running ultra endurance events? And I'm always curious about where do those guys put their head. I remember years ago, I ended up hearing about this guy who jumped out of a plane with no parachute, and he made his own little landing pad out of nets, and it was small. I think it was like 4 meters by 4 meters. It was very small. And he jumped out of that plane and he didn't have a parachute. There was if he made a mistake, he was going to die, And how do you clear your mind?
Right.
To be so calm, to go ahead and do a risky thing. So when you're free diving and when you're going down and down and down and down and down and down, if you make a mistake, you die.
That's it.
Same thing as free climbing. I mean, you make a mistake and you die. How do you calm your mind and put yourself into that place in that moment to be excellent?
And Natalie talked about that a lot as well, when she was talking about fencing. In fencing, there is no thinking, right? You have to actually, the minute you start thinking, you lose.
Right.
It sounds really odd. It's like, well, what are you doing? And it's actually, and I think we have to explore this more and more, Dave, as we go along, which is that, what is it that we can do sort of almost autonomically rather than, sort of with the emotion, right? Now, maybe if I'm trying to crawl the last few feet over the finish line, like, Julie Moss did at the Ironman years ago because she had, sort of fallen down and couldn't get back up. That might be, the brutality of it. But the rest of the time, there's a beauty in the moment and the peace that you get that allows us to sort of accomplish something that wouldn't be possible otherwise.
And I think that's the similarity that we're finding with all of our guests, isn't it, Joe? Is that in the more questions I ask, and the more that I personally myself try to live on that razor's edge of being excellent at my craft, what the commonality I see, the common denominator is it's in the mind, and it's doing something specific to that sport and that craft, but being present in that moment and being calm. And I see during a pandemic, during a quarantine, during COVID-19, where we're at right now, I see that the majority of the world could really benefit from understanding how people are doing it so exceptionally well in a sport that doesn't really matter. I mean, fencing doesn't matter, diving doesn't matter, running doesn't matter, but yet we learn these things and we're able to take what we learn about being calm and in the moment and being present, living in the now. The past happened, the future hasn't happened yet, it doesn't matter, mindlessness. We could go on and on and on about this stuff for days. But the more questions we ask from people that are living on the razor's edge within their craft, I think that, Joe, you and I can be able to present something really excellent to the world, where the average person might go, I can take that little nugget, and I could present that in my life, and my life could be exponentially better if I could just do that more on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think these are part of the life's lessons back to, I don't necessarily need permission to go live a life I want. And I actually don't need a lot of help. I just have to work on it myself to clear my mind. It's the practices, the daily practices. Like, we should jump in. And I'll tell a little bit about my athletic stuff as well. But, you're an ultra runner. I'll say just a couple of things for you, because you're probably not, probably one of the top 10 ultra runners in the world. You're setting out to do, break the Trans-Canadian record. We believe that you're going to get that done for sure because of your daily practices and what you've taken. So how did you get into ultra running? How did you realize you were so good at this sport? You were just telling me about your run this morning, and, you already ran a marathon distance before we even started this. And it wasn't that hard. And so how did you find your way there? What have you done? Tell us some of your bigger, accomplishments, and why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, well, the runs used to be harder, and I think that you end up picking up a lot of these, not only, developing the fitness base, but, the mindset and on and so forth. It's going for a jog this morning was the very best part of my day. And I enjoyed every single second of it. And it's getting faster and it's getting better. And the fitness is coming year to year, and it's really fun. So I've been running ultramarathons for, I would say now 16 years. And I think what got me into ultramarathoning was curiosity. Running super long distances, it whenever you hear about it as an outsider, and I once was an outsider looking at ultramarathons, I thought, wow, there's no one sport in the world that I've got more questions about how do you do what you do? Why do you do it? Like, number one, why? Like, why would you run for days on end? But then the physiology behind it, the mental aspects, the fueling aspects, the everything. And how does this work? Like how does one go about doing this? So the curiosity made me only, and maybe that's exactly why we're here doing this podcast, Joe, is because I've always just been so curious. And the more I'm curious, the more I'm going to try it and pick apart little bits. And it's, even Michelangelo said in Cora Amparo on his, I think it was his 88th birthday, and that means I'm still learning. We're all still learning, and we're all still working on our craft, whatever it is. And Michelangelo was incredible. So no, over the last many years, I've gotten stronger and stronger at my sport. And what I used to believe was impossible now is very, very possible. It was funny. I was even about a week and a half ago. I remember a number of years ago, I really wanted to run a sub 16-hour 100-mile.
Yeah.
And then
Great.
I think only like a week and a half ago, I ran a 13 and a half hour 100-mile just randomly around Calgary. And it was so fun. It was like, wow, what used to be impossible is now very possible. So what still is out there that I deem now impossible will become possible later, if that makes sense. And so it's neat because you pick up these little tidbits and pacing strategies and fueling strategies, but mostly mental strategies, because the mind only knows two things: the pictures you draw for it and the words that you tell it. And I really don't believe it's as difficult as that. We make it a lot more difficult, but going out, when I talk about my running, Joe, I don't talk about pain and suffering and agony, because we categorically move away from things like that. If I start thinking that what I want to do and what I want to get better at is painful, putting your hand into a fire is painful. And there's a good reason why you don't walk close to an open fire, because that would be very bad and that is painful. So why would I want to categorize the thing that I want to better myself at, which is running, as being painful? Because I'll categorically move away from that. I want to wake up every morning and thinking, oh, okay, I can't wait to get out for this run, because this is my joy. This is my purpose. I can frame it in different ways. And so over the last number of years, I've gotten better and better. I've set a number of Canadian records, the Canadian 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour records. I've set a couple of treadmill world records. Zach Bitter just ended up breaking one of them. I set forth in 2018 to break the Trans-Canadian speed record. So that was running 105 kilometers every day for 67 days across Canada. Canada's a really, really big country. Yeah. One province, Ontario, it takes 20 days running 105 kilometers a day. And it's one of the more iconic speed records, Transcon speed records anywhere in the world. Yes. Because it's so large. Even the Transcon speed record holder, Pete Kostelnick, he said, boy, Canada's really big, and that's a long time to be running fast. Mm-hmm. You bet it is. And
it is. That's pretty rough.
So I'm supposed to be honest with you, Joe, I'm supposed to be doing it right now. I'm supposed to be in the middle of that big province, Ontario, in the middle of nowhere, running, and instead I'm here doing this. And so I've been given the gift of time. We are sharpening our knives when it comes to my charitable giving and what we're doing with this run. We're also going to be creating a rare disease strategy in Ottawa. We're going to be creating a national movement for rare disease in Canada with this run, because it creates a lot of attention and people get behind these things. They really, really do, in my experience. And so, we've been given the gift of time, and now we can crisp this up. And that's exactly what we're doing.
What's interesting, Dave, because while we took very, very different paths, there are some themes that I would say that are consistent and comparable. One is about this idea: when you make a commitment, you make it really primarily to yourself. Mm-hmm. When you make a commitment to yourself, a lot of different things happen and better outcomes happen. Often when you don't get something done, it's because you never really committed it to yourself, and you're sort of like, I guess it's okay if I don't. But if you make the commitment, hey, I'm going to go break a record, or I'm just going to run a lot of days in a row, and the only one measuring yourself is yourself. And I think what I found in our relationship over this period of time is that you have a very good dialogue with yourself, and we're finding that with our guests. We hope that our audience finds that that's the place to start. Let's do that. And so I did that to myself, because I wrote about it in a book that I wrote called Living the High Performance Life, that I had found the greatest rut of my life. the white collar success, making money and the house and the cars and all of that. And I was like, wow, this can't be it. Like, that's what I'm going to do for the next 50 years. Like, was everyone saw it as, success, and I found it as a bit of a struggle. And so I started challenging myself to more. In the beginning it was run a mile, do 10 push-ups. It was nothing, but 20 years later, I'm on this 185 days in a row. I've done over 10 miles of running. I've done 100 pull-ups, 100 push-ups, and a bunch of other stuff without a day off. And, it's not to be measured in a race. This is about me making a choice of how to live and how to experience, and then how to sort of, like, when some mornings it might be, but then knowing that you're going to uplift yourself by sticking to your commitment. And it then makes you confident to take on sort of anything. I mean, in some level, I'm sure you're worried about trying to run across Canada, but all the practice you've done makes that easier.
Well, I think so. And I think, overall, Joe, if you don't mind, one of the things that I've noticed about you over the years, and I haven't told you this yet, so, now we're telling you this over a broadcast and everybody else is hearing it at the same time, is that, what I noticed about you, which is very, very different and specific, which I find is very attractive in people, is that you don't commit to people and you don't commit to business, but you commit to a mission. And so what I find about that is that, but by committing to a mission, you are committing to people to a degree.
Sure.
But when I find that you do that, it's not as specific, right? It's just the broad approach to that mission, and that mission, whatever that mission is, you're making those steps every single day in order to go about doing that. And I think that with my run across Canada, that's exactly the same thing. I could talk about the specifics of the 105 kilometers every day and the fuel intake and the caloric burn. And people are really fascinated about that because that's what we can measure that, right? But what's the mission, right? Yeah. And so if you commit to that mission, and the mission is specific to me, like I make that up in my own mind. And I didn't get up today and go for a run because I needed to meet a weekly mileage goal.
Right.
I needed to fulfill my mission of who I am, what I want to become, who I'm becoming, and how I'm being that person. And so that's what I noticed about you, Joe, is that you are steadfast in your commitment to your mission. And that's foremost. And I find it's something that I think that both you and I are trying to find within our guests that we bring on to Chasing Tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. What I'll put a spin on it just slightly differently. We think about brand, Coca-Cola, Procter and Gamble, and big brands, Nike, that we recognize around the world. And what we don't sort of think about explicitly is that those brands bring consistency to the brand promise all the time. You don't even have to like it, but it's always the same. And but they've built the attributes that you would connect with that. And I think in life, each of us have an opportunity to build our own personal brand. And I have worked on that consistently for, the past 20 years. If you met someone who knows me 20 years ago and you said to them, tell me about Joe, you'd say, oh, wow, that's the same brand that I see now. And that's where I think we have much more power than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. It's not whether you're 5 foot tall, 6 foot tall, run faster, think better. It's about defining, this mission that you're on and then staying consistent to it. It doesn't sort of change every week or every month. You can go from being a triathlete to a runner, which I did. That's not the personal brand is all about this curious individual trying to find out, what personal fulfillment means in life by both exploring it and then sharing it with others so that we can all have a similar great opportunity to, feel wonderful about, our contributions here. And, as we move along in our lives, our purpose can evolve where, I feel very much committed to helping people achieve their potential now. But if you hadn't done that for yourself, it's very hard to then help others, because you have to have seen, there's that Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. There's the moments of despair along the way. And, but darkest before the dawn, sure, all the time. And that sun's going to come up no matter what. And that's been, my lottery ticket, is having learned this, before I leave the planet, so that not only can I benefit myself, but if I always said, but for helping one person who could be better in their life, then my life was worth it. And, we're sort of trying to do that here. Dave, maybe just a little bit, like when you go and do this 100-mile distance at the speed you're doing, some people will be like, wow, that's really crazy to run 100 miles. And the day after day, when you're going to go out and do that, what are some of your sort of mental techniques that you use to, get past that sort of those moments that are going to happen? Do you have anything you specifically try to do?
Yeah, ultimately trying to just, what I've tried a whole bunch of different techniques and different ideas and thoughts and different sports psychologists, and ultimately, the ones that it really work, the ones that really stick, I find are just being in the moment and being in that space and being okay without judgment of what this is in the moment. Don't make a big deal about it. The past has happened. There's nothing you can do about it. No need to fret. The future hasn't happened yet. So no need to worry. But in the moment, if you were really honest with yourself and took a deep breath in and fell into that space, into that moment where you are in the moment at that time, you're really okay. You are okay. There's blisters. Yeah, your muscles are tight. You're hungry. You're all these things, but generally you're okay. And to check in and to be okay with where you are in that moment. And it doesn't really matter if you are 6 hours into a run, 16 hours into a run, or 136 hours into a run. If you're okay, you're okay. You take what you're given. I mean, physiologically, if you like they always say, don't be stupid during the first half of a race and don't be a coward in the last half of a race. Just be okay and take what you're given, what your body is giving you that day. Train your body in a reasonable fashion so that you can end up using what we all know now about human physiology of getting your body to be as fit as you can in the moment, so that on race day you have in the tank, your mitochondria are doing what they need to do, but clearing your mind and just taking what comes. Because I think for the most part, I think his name is Alex Hutchison. He ended up writing a book called Endure. Yeah. And it was really about how bad do you really want it? And even the top tier runners, they give up. I get frustrated with myself because I give up far too often. And I know when I do, and they've never ever completed a race where I thought I put everything out there. I'll be honest. And it's frustrating, but it's also very human because it's good. You get in your head and you pull back and you pull, okay, can I really do this? And self-doubt and all those different things. But when I get into those places, Joe, to answer your question, you take a deep breath and you ask yourself, am I really okay in this space? Yeah. And the answer almost always is yes. Calm down, Dave. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. And really, all in all you're doing in this world right now is you're going for a jog and you're pushing your limits. And that's great. Pretty good. Yeah. I like that. I set out to, in 2017, I set out to do this 6 marathons. Well, you bet. In 6 consecutive days, run a marathon across 6 continents. So I went from Sydney to Singapore, and then from Singapore to Johannesburg, London, London to Sao Paulo to LA. It was 37,000 miles of flying in a week. I ran not a lot of miles on your standard, but 157 miles. That's a big week. I slept 12 hours because it was about 2 hours a night. I flew in coach, so I was in the back of the plane. And so you'd have sort of 12 hours in the country and 12 hours on a plane every day for 6 straight days. And, it was interesting. But the reason I bring it up was
when I started, I wrote on a little yellow sticky note. I said, the lows will be the highs.
Mm.
That's what I went looking for. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't and I also looked for the beautiful people, and I could spend an hour telling you about all the amazing experiences of people who ran alongside, like you found. One guy in Brazil, he couldn't run, he didn't know how to ride a bike, he took a scooter and he rode
Mm.
42 kilometers on his scooter next to us because, like a little razor thing, pushing. It's
Yeah.
amazing. He wanted to be part of something. But
Right.
when I wrote that down, actually the entire week from that moment was a success
Mm-hmm.
because I never really found that low.
Yeah.
I never found it because that was actually the high, was the challenge. And
Right.
that's what I'm desperately curious about, that
Yeah.
side of life. Like when that happens, what happens? That's the question. Like, so when it gets really hard, and we're talking running or that stuff, but in life,
Mm-hmm.
when the tough moment happens, what happens then? That's what I like to find out more about.
Well, that's what and that's, such great insight. When you're struggling, you're growing, right?
Yep.
It's, and, but I think that it's so, when you talk about it, Joe, it sounds so easy, right? Because you acknowledge it for what it is, but you also have the maturity to be able to pull back and go, okay, yeah, you know, I think the average person out there, when they're struggling, they pull back, and there's all the self-doubt, and there's all the voices in your head, and there's
Mm.
all the, those moments when you were a child and you were told that you couldn't, or you shouldn't, and you can't, and we fall back on those defaults. But I think it's a beautiful thing that, guys like yourself, Joe, can tell the world that, no, those moments when you're really struggling. And I know a lot of our listeners right now in quarantine, as much as we all don't like to
Mm.
admit that we're struggling, a lot of people are struggling out there, and I'm personally struggling as well too. Those are the moments that you go back and go, okay, that's where there was trauma, and then I did these things, and then I grew, and I'm growing as a human being at this point. This is how I'm constructing my puzzle, my ultimate puzzle of becoming, self-actualization, becoming being the person I want to be.
Yeah.
And so, without those moments, without creating an opportunity that's hard enough where you're going to have, to fall and get back up, then I don't think you're really living, are you?
No, and we're not judging anyone.
No,
We
no.
all get to choose what we want to do. Here's the real point, though, is that it's okay to choose. If you choose something different, you'll get a different outcome. And I'm a
Mm,
very outcome focused person. So if you want that outcome, then we should then work towards that. And if you don't, then amen, that's okay. But
mm-hmm,
when you do, then this part of the learning has to kick in. You need to sort of accept that, I don't know, like you might want to do a startup, or you might want to be a CEO, or you might want to be a professional runner, or whatever it might be. Those are journeys that are going to have with them
mm-hmm.
struggle. So define that the struggle is acceptable. Here's one of the analogies I always use. American football. If you play American football, you get tackled. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's just your job. If I'm walking down the street in Calgary and I tackle Dave, I could get arrested. So the
Yeah.
context matters, right? The context matters. So if
Mm-hmm.
you accept that, in fact, part of the job is being tackled, then you don't get too upset. So football players don't
Mm-hmm.
get upset about being tackled. It's their job. So when we go set out to take on a bigger role in a career, or we run a farther distance, or we do something there is going to be some kind of being tackled in there. It's just part of it. And
Mm-hmm.
once you sort of can get that in through your thick skull, you're like, okay, yeah, I don't like the feeling, like we know this, like when you're at mile 85 in the 100-mile run, it hurts a little bit, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you might be doing fine, but it still hurts.
Mm-hmm.
But you accept it and you don't fight it. Now all of the energy you have in your system is now pointing positive. That's why I wrote it down. The lows would be the highs, so that if I hit that, it wasn't a negative. It was
Right.
a high. It was like perfect. Then everything falls in place.
And I absolutely agree. And I think that, to forward that, I think that there's something innate about humans, and especially people who are going to be logging in and listening to, the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, because, we all inherently want to grow. And we see these people that are living on the razor's edge, and we go, okay, how did they do that? With their mindset, even with Zach talking about his, high fat diet,
Yep.
he's really in tune with his body.
Yeah.
He knows exactly when it comes to his heart rate and his stride frequency. And like, it was a beautiful conversation, but it was, but we have an opportunity to kind of go beyond that as well too. And some of the best questions I asked Zach, I found that weren't necessarily about his stride frequency or about his his heart rate or about his fat intake. It was about the why and the
Yeah.
how and the who is he at his core. And I find that we have an excellent opportunity, Joe, that we can end up providing an opportunity for growth where people don't see it, where we think, oh, hey, if I want to become a better cyclist, I need to, drive more power through my pedals. But how?
Yep.
Right? And there's so many means to go about doing that. And so sometimes it might be the positive outlook of that cyclist. And,
And
sometimes, but in the media, we don't really cover that. We're just covering, holy moly, this guy's strong. This guy can do this many squats. But Joe, you and I, we can dig in. And hopefully we can end up creating an opportunity where our listeners can learn something new about what makes that athlete tick.
And I think that sometimes we only see one path to the answer, and we're going to show other paths. A number of years ago, I felt like I needed to learn more from smart people. And I was like, well, maybe I should go back to school. Well, it wasn't very practical for me to go back to school. And I certainly probably wasn't going to get Harvard to get my MBA. So I thought, how else could I do that? Mm-hmm. So that year I watched 1,000 TED Talks. I watched 3 a day.
Cool.
And I then hung out with a lot of smart people for a year. Mm-hmm. They're on YouTube. Like, this was easy to do. And I opened my eyes to that there are other ways, that our excuses, our lack of sort of, creativity or desire, not that it isn't possible. So is it different? Sure. Probably would have been different had I got my MBA at Harvard. Great. But in that year, what I absorbed from listening to 1,000 really smart people about a variety of topics that I couldn't even tell you, was it just increased sort of my overall, general mental wellness, knowledge, confidence. And, I could tell you 100 other ideas like that we'll tease out throughout the year or the years ahead as we talk to people about, what other paths did they take when maybe the traditional path was not so obvious, or for the excuse of, well, I have 2 jobs, I can't do that. I think if you told me correctly, Dave, you got up at 4 and ran this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning because you have a lot to do today. That's a good choice, because that was what you wanted to accomplish. Otherwise, you could have said, well, I'd rather sleep till 6:30 or 7 o'clock.
I had a lot of excuses, as does everybody else, right? Mm-hmm.
They do. That's what we choose to do. So I think we have the essence of what we're going to try and accomplish. So maybe we finish up with our views on this Chasing Tomorrow. We spent a lot of time talking about what we wanted to accomplish, and we felt that the name Chasing Tomorrow sort of, signified in a deep way what it is we're setting out to do. So maybe your perspective on that, then I'll give that, and we'll wrap up for the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you said, Joe, we ask our guests in the tail end, how are you chasing tomorrow? What are you doing, today to chase excellence tomorrow? Because I think that everybody that we're bringing on to our podcast, everybody's growing. Everybody's looking for self-actualization on that razor's edge. And how are you going about doing that? And so myself, and a big part of that is what I'm doing here with the podcast with you is understand that I know very little, and understand that there's a tremendous amount of growth in being open to learning. To announcing to the world that I personally, Dave Proctor, I don't know. And I feel confident about certain things, but I also feel that I've got a lot left in my tank when it comes to learning and understanding and hearing other people's perspective, where I'm like, oh, okay, that does make sense. And I'm willing to adopt that. I'm willing to accept that into my life and to dabble little bits where there could be potential growth, where ultimately I will be the person I want, but by becoming and learning and picking apart all these different aspects of learning and philosophy and ideas and thought and heck, even physiological practices with running or parenting practices with my children, understand that I could be a better dad, I could be a better husband, and being open to accept that criticism and learn. So, chasing tomorrow for me is being open to learn and being open to understand that, I could be a lot better of a human being and of an athlete and a father and a massage therapist and a podcast interviewer and ultimately, I'm 39 years old. I'm turning 40 this year, and in my 40s and 50s, I'm going to be a lot more of a dynamic person, where I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin with who I've become. And so that's ultimately it. It's nothing specific, but it's good. A mission. Yeah. And so, Joe, what about you? Well, I've come to know you quite well. You've become a great friend, but it's always a very interesting question when you ask somebody to answer, what are you doing today? What did you do yesterday in order to chase tomorrow, in order to become who you ultimately want to be tomorrow? So what's your answer?
I guess on the journey that I've been on, what I realize is that in the moment we often fail, but when we think about the plan, we succeed. And so when I think about chasing tomorrow, it's been so much of an enabler for me to say, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow, because I don't then worry about the moment. I make the commitment. And it became sort of my sort of recipe for success. We'll use always running just because it's an easy analogy, but I'm going to run tomorrow morning, decide that today. Well, if it's raining tomorrow, we already decided, so you're going to go in the rain. If you decide in the morning, you might say, well, it's raining, I'm not going to go. Mm-hmm. So part of it is always for me setting sort of the context for this success into the future. And that what I'm finding as I chase tomorrow is that, the power inside me increases at every iteration. In that, you sort of think as you get older that, you get weaker or more frail. And I find that I get stronger and more vibrant and have more vitality and more curiosity. It doesn't go the other way. And that's because I have this sort of like, it's out there and I want to go find it. And what am I trying to find, is first, what was personal fulfillment for me, finding a good purpose. And that has helped immensely. Secondly, it's sort of, this idea that we make our lives the way we want the life to be. And for me, chasing tomorrow then takes out the burden on other people, because now it's up to me. And then lastly, because I'm sort of deeply curious, I always want to know. It just takes some time. So it's going to happen tomorrow. And I'm going to find out more the next day. And so it's like, but it never ends, because we have infinite potential, and we might as well see how close we could get to that. At least in our lifetime, it'll probably be something that's understood. Maybe in future lifetimes, who knows what might happen. So it is, it's a privilege to be able to do this. I never thought I'd be a podcaster, a blogger, an author, a father, all these things, that you could be in life. But we know that when we put our minds to it, amazing results happen. And and the life that we want develops. And, you know, from ordinary to extraordinary is what we want both people on the podcast to hear, and then to believe they can do the same for themselves. And then, you know, we'll be having fun and really certainly serving our purpose.
Absolutely. And ultimately giving our curiosity, to all of our viewers as well too. And so, as curious as you and I are, as much as I like to think that I'm taking, as I'm being selfish by having these guests on, asking all these questions. Maybe these are questions as well too that the average person just isn't asking, and maybe it's something that they might want to receive as well too. So it's my honor and privilege to do this with you, Joe, and for all the viewers out there who are, logging in every week and checking us out. Thank you. Keep doing it, and tell all your friends about it. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yes, as we chase tomorrow together, Dave. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Take care.